Hello and welcome back to the channel. In today's video we're going to be having a look at the Groove. So the Groove is a B-side from the Absolution era, a fan favourite and very rarely played live. Over the years where it has been played, guitar wise it has kind of evolved as the years have gone on. And in today's video I'm going to be focusing on the pedals and effects and sounds that I used in my recent cover of the song. As always we'll be going from start to finish from the song, looking at each section, and I'll be telling you what pedals I used and the sorts of sounds that I was going for. The guitar I'm going to be using for this video is going to be my recently constructed Telecaster. You can click here to find out more about that guitar, and before we get into it, don't forget to like, share and subscribe and hit the bell to not miss out on any of my content. And without any further ado, let's look at the Groove. So the opening of the Groove is just messing around with a Fuzz Factory pedal, looking for those kind of high-pitched squealy sounds. If you have a Fuzz Factory, great, you will know how to use it. If you don't, but you have a pedal or series of pedals that can help you create such sounds where they're kind of really weird and high-pitched and squealy and whatnot, great. Before I got my Fuzz Factory pedal, I used to use my Whammy pedal, 2 octaves up, hit a harmonic on the guitar somewhere and then just kind of mess around with that. It's not completely necessary that you have to have a Fuzz Factory in there. It's really just a kind of a light texture, really. At the end of the day, it's not really offering much for the song kind of composition wise. So with that in mind, this is what that sounds like. So as you can see, it's not really that in depth, it's not really that well thought out, it's just a crazy sound and playing around with it. If you don't have any of the pedals like that in your disposal, look at what you have currently and see what kind of strange sounds that you can make with that. There's something to be said for just scraping your pick along the strings and just seeing what that can do. Look at hyper music for that sort of approach. So moving on to the main riff of the Groove now. The pedal setup for this is taking my signal, putting it through my Whammy pedal at a harmony octave down, then splitting that from one side is the Big Muff and the other is my Overdrive Distortion. Noting the settings on the Overdrive Distortion being quite a lot of drive and the overdrive or distortion control being blended much more towards the overdrive setting at 9 o'clock. My approach for this sound is that it gives you quite a broad, strong sound to go with, the harmony octave in there getting you those low rumbles, the Big Muff getting in that classic Big Muff type sound, a lot of low mids, and the Overdrive Distortion offering a lot of grit on the other side of things but with a lot of body behind it. And in theory, in my mind, that offers quite a good, strong, solid sound. And this is what it sounds like. So my approach for the Groove here is quite a unique one in terms of how I like to produce my kind of guitar sounds for songs. Usually I like to have a number of different sounds for any given songs. When a new section comes in, I've got a new sound to kind of keep things interesting. But this sound is quite present throughout the entire song because there's other elements going on. So if you potentially are limited in the sounds that you have available, you can use this setup for effectively the entire song. So keeping that in mind, let's look at the next section and see how I'm blending two different approaches for guitar playing. So to heavily contrast the guitar track that has the whammy and so on going on, for this section for the verse is just my Overdrive Distortion, the same settings as before, just really relying on that kind of full body kind of open sounds that that pedal is achieving, really getting away from the kind of low grittiness from what the whammy setup really has. And to get even further away from that, it's not playing the usual riff, it's actually just strumming the chords for that part of the song. Blending them together as I did in the track really kind of doubles down and really gets a strong kind of sound overall from it, but you can still kind of hear the separate sounds that they're achieving. As I said, it's the same settings from the Overdrive Distortion as before, so keeping that in mind, this is what that section sounds like. So as you can hear there, it's quite open-ended, really full-bodied, really appropriate for an overdrive type sound. A distortion or a classic kind of distortion setup would be far too muffled and kind of not really letting you kind of pick out those higher frequencies in there. So if you're going to incorporate this sort of sound in your board for the groove or kind of playing in general, at least in my view, if you want to have those chords come out quite well and really pick out each note, you might want to go for an overdrive setting. So moving on to the chorus of the groove now, I have two options for sounds I want to use whenever I play this song, which is either of the two sounds we've used previously, which is the overdrive distortion setting or the big muff whammy setup before. Because I like to play the verse with the overdrive sound, letting those chords breathe and so on, I like to contrast that by going back to the whammy setting and playing the chorus normally through that to get a nice kind of good mix of sounds in there and to kind of reinforce the A-B nature of the groove by A being just between those two particular sounds. It's not rocket science, it's no different from the sound that we used previously in the riff, so without any further ado, this is what that sounds like. Because the guitar is playing the same as what the bass is doing, doubling down by using the whammy in the guitar playing really does help strengthen that powerful performance within there, which is why I still like to keep the whammy in there. It's a sound that I use quite a lot in my pedal setup, that particularly being my big muff and my whammy pedal put together with the harmony octave setting. It's really good for playing Muse songs and letting a riff stand out, and in this particular instance it really does shine through. So moving on to the final section of the groove, which is the solo. My approach for my signal path for this is as follows, which is taking my signal, putting it through my whammy, splitting it. From one side is my prime distortion and phaser set to its slowest setting, and the other side is just the big muff. Noting that the whammy pedal is set to the shallow detune setting with the heel down, so the effect isn't actually engaged. Now I like to have this approach because the whammy pedal itself is still, whilst it's not affecting the signal with that effect, it's still being processed and therefore kind of delaying the signal ever so slightly, which kind of helps to affect the kind of stereo field quite dramatically. What I do also do just personally is through my Boss ES8 is use my foot pedal, my volume pedal, as an expression pedal for the whammy, so sometimes I can then bring in that detune setting for particular parts of the song, but it's kind of just really when I feel like it. All it does is just kind of create this kind of low modulation sound in there, not at all affecting how the song or the sound should really change. It's just an artistic choice that I have. Really, if you are going to be playing the solo yourself, you do not need to concern yourself with this whammy technique. It's just something that I personally use. If you were to recreate this sound at home, you will particularly want to focus on having a pedal that really brings out those higher frequencies. Want to really cut through the kind of muddy tone of the song that is there overall, so having something to contrast that heavily is really useful. I throw in some slow phase in there to kind of have a different texture in there, and some slow modulation is always really good to kind of help give a bit of a different texture to the song, because otherwise it is just going to be a distortion pedal, which to me sounds and feels a bit boring. And the way that I can build my board, I like to have two kind of drive pedals in there, split hard left and hard right, just to really thicken up the sound that I have. But really, you may want to at home just focus on having one good strong solid distortion setting, which would work really well if you are paying close attention to the settings and sounds that I've used previously, because we've just looked at having an overdrive sound and a big fuzzy tone. A distortion pedal at this point would be a new sound in this interpretation of the setup for this, and would work quite nicely. So with all that in mind, this is what the solo sounds like. So there we have it, that is Sound Like the Groove in its entirety. We've looked at the song in full from start to finish. I've shown you the pedals I'm using and the sounds I'm trying to achieve with those, so hopefully that's helped you out. Do let me know what you thought about it down in the comments below, and if you have any words of wisdom yourself, I'd very much like to know about that. And while you're there, if you do have a song that you'd like me to look at for another Sound Like, of course do let me know. But until next time, I've been Harry, and thanks for watching.